I think getting a relationship. One thing that you have to look at, especially if you're applying for a grant from the government, is it seems to be this faceless entity, and there's a wall between you and the people behind it. There are people reading your application, and they read thousands, and they get bored. If you can do, it's a competitive environment as well, so anything you can do to give yourself a little bit of a leg up, do it. You know, if you know who's going to be assessing your grant, or if you know the person who's managing the program, ask them out for a coffee. If they say yes, they're doing it because they're allowed to. They'll never do it simply because, you know, they're expecting they're not allowed to. So feel free to ask them out for coffee. If they say yes, it's because they're able to, and talk to them. And what it will mean is when somebody in there is assessing your grant, they're going to say, oh, that was that nice guy I met, and he seemed very, you know, enthusiastic and really focused on the idea. I really do believe that was one of the reasons why you end up getting a grant, because Film Victoria is maybe a little bit of a softer government entity, and you can approach them maybe more than, say, a federal grant. And I think part of that process was that I can sit down with the person who's going to be assessing it and ask them a whole bunch of questions. And they'll do that. They're talking to you because they're doing their job. They're supposed to be talking to you and helping you with your application. So feel free to have that dialogue with them. If they're not supposed to be talking to you, they'll refuse your coffee. You know, it's a pretty straightforward process.
And Comet was definitely like that, wasn't it? When you're going through the process, you pass the mic back.
Yes, I met my business advisor my now business advisor in 2004, and I would just call him up every 6 months, or every 3 to 6 months, and just tell him how the product was progressing, how, you know, the prototypes are developing, what sort of interest we received from the government, or what you know, in terms of contracts or from other clients. And it was through that constant persistence, actually, that I think I eventually, you know, was it 5 years later?
In what year did she get the Comet grant? 1999?
No, 2009.
Yeah, sorry, man, 2009.
Yeah.
And in a nick of time, because I think it closed in December or January.
Yeah.
And Judith, you had something that you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I suppose I just wanted to point out that grants are either eligibility-based grants or competitive grants. And the ones that these guys have been talking about are competitive-based grants. And when you're applying for a competitive-based grant, it's very much around what are the objectives of that particular organisation, what are they trying to achieve, which links into your comment about what are you trying to achieve, but are you achieving what that grant-giving body is trying to achieve? Whereas my program.
So you actually hit my second thing, competitive versus eligibility grants. In a nutshell, can you explain that for us? What's a competitive grant? What's an eligibility grant?
Well, eligibility grant is, like in our program, as long as you satisfy the criteria, you're in. So as long as you have 3 years of operation, over $1 million turnover, and you're a company, and you're within the creative industry sector, basically you're eligible for the free scheme, 20,000 match funding, 50,000 match funding. With a competitive grant, for example, Commercialisation Australia will be competitive grants, which is now the new version of Comet. And actually, I think about some of the Victorian government grants are also eligibility grants as well, too. So you can mention those ones. I'll leave the competitive to Adrian.
This is really important to know the difference, because we meet some people and we try and explain to them, like R&D tax concession, it's an entitlement. As long as you meet the eligibility criteria and they don't believe us, they're just going, no, it's too good to be true. And some people still don't believe us until we actually get the money through for them. If you know the entitlements, it's really good. There aren't a lot, but you know, there's R&D tax concession, export market development grant. In Victoria, there's First Step Exporter. There's the Multimedia Victoria has the ICT travel fairs. And the good thing is, it's not like you're competing against everyone else against this one bucket of funds. And you know, whoever's the very, very best, you don't really know you're going up against gets it. And I find that in those programs, there's opportunity to have discussion with government, and you can actually they'll help you to work out whether you're eligible. And they're very open to have those discussions. It's not like a tender process where you can't talk to people.
They want you to know that you're not eligible, if you're not eligible, so that you don't have to waste a whole bunch of time.
Judith's got a comment on that as well. So, I mean, 2 things. There is a guilty pleasure in getting approved for a grant and sort of going, well, you know, this is really good money. but the government wouldn't be giving it to you if they didn't want to. And I think that's a mindset that you should sort of take when you're applying, that the money's there because they want to spend it on something and they want to be seen to be innovative. The other thing is that we're pretty lucky.
I think that they want to be more than seen to be innovative. I think that they might want to foster jobs and create economies or whatever.
The other
or they might just want to see to be innovative. I don't know.
They want to stay in for another 4 years. The other thing is that working with people in the US, they're constantly amazed by how much grant money is in Australia. Like literally, I've spoken to businesses over there, and it's tooth and nail the whole time. The only place you might get a grant is from, say, your local government there or a city because they're trying to get more jobs to go. And so there is plenty of opportunity out there to apply for grants as well, especially, you know, again, because there is so much available and the government literally wants to give it to the businesses. And again, I talk to other people and that too good to be true comment comes up more often than not, to the point where people are like, there's got to be a catch. There's got to be a catch. Why would they give me, if I spend $100,000 on research and development, why am I going to get $40,000 cash back? What are they going to take my house if I don't? It's literally just because the government needs to send the money somewhere. Yeah.
But I also, it's a double-edged sword. You need to know what their goals are, as well as at the same time as doing that. Because I think that, as I jokingly said, the goals are more about being seen to be innovative. So, for example, for the City of Melbourne grant that you went for, they're fairly particular in what they want to see from a grant.
Yeah, I applied twice through the City of Melbourne and was unsuccessful both times, and then I thought that I would actually get the grant written by somebody else, and then I was finally successul. So I think,
Because they obviously knew what the City of Melbourne was looking for.
It's so involved. I mean, it's not just what the City of Melbourne are looking for, it's actually understanding the grant writing process. So yeah, when I was a sculptor, I applied for many grants and I wrote the applications myself, and I was never successful. So I think it always is worthwhile getting someone else to.
I think we'll talk about that in a minute. But this person here has been very patient after I didn't take your question.
Thank you. My name's Andrew. I want to ask a question about Anthill Magregor-Dey. Can you give us some examples, please, of the processes that you needed to document for the grant?
So as a software company, we are one of those more modern startup software companies that's fairly fast and loose in our development. We use a development method commonly sort of known as agile development, where you're literally deciding what you're building as you're building it, which is very common in startups. And so, unfortunately, that environment doesn't leave a lot of time to document your processes. This module connects to that module, and they talk this way. And so, in regards to documentation, certainly processes around, from a software perspective at least, I can't really talk from other businesses' perspectives, but documenting what the software is you're building, what its role is, what the tasks of the certain individual modules are within it, what they're supposed to do, workflows between one scenario to another, use case scenarios, so somebody's going to use it this way and this is the outcome we expect. A lot of startups in the software space, especially if you're a small 1 or 2 man operation, it's just too much work for you to be doing that. And so again, going through that grant process actually forced us to do that. If I can recall, if we're talking specifically about the Film Victoria grant, some other processes were our marketing. It was literally almost like developing a business plan to a point where you had to say, once we build it, this is how we're going to sell it. And the Film Victoria wanted to see that as well. So it forced us to sit down and think, okay, when we're building this, who are we selling it to? How much are they going to pay for it? I mean, a lot of the time you're an entrepreneur, you've got a great idea, someone's going to buy this, and you start to get out there and do it. And you really just don't sort of sit back and think about those business processes that are involved. So from a software point of view, it forced us to document our development process and understand what we were building. When you've got 2 or 3 guys in a room and you're all focused and you can all talk to each other all the time, documentation is not required.